morning. Nice to see you back. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's hearing. Today we're going to continue hearing evidence from Mr. Ben Bailey. Would you ask Mr. Bailey to come in, please? Good morning, Mr. Bailey.
Good morning, everyone.
Ready to carry on?
I am.
Good. Thank you very much. Yes, Mr. Bailey.
Mr. Chairman, good morning. Thank you. Mr. Bailey, good morning.
Good morning.
I'm going to turn to the topic of ACM panels and specifically PE and FR options. But I'm going to begin in November 2015 with an email about the O&M manual. So that's the context for the next few questions. Could you please be shown HAR 402555? Now, this is an email from you to Steve Roberts and Neil Wilson at CEP, who are the fabricators of the ACM panels, dated the 4th of November 2015. And you say, Steve and Neil, could you provide copies of the warranties for the following items for inclusion in our O&M manual? And then you set out 4 items there, the last of which is Renault bond, plus any other technical information. So, do we take it from that you were involved in collating the information for the Harley operation and maintenance, or O&M manual?
Yes.
You are. Can we now look at that document? It's RBK 3027339. Is this the Harley O&M manual? In 2015 that you saw at the time, do you think?
I believe so, yes.
Yeah. Can we look at page 182? And here we see an Alcoa information sheet for Renault Bond and Lux products. And if you look under the heading Fire Certificates for Renault Bond architecture, we can see that the United Kingdom classification for both PE and FR is class 0. Do you see that?
Yes.
Did you ever read this document?
I don't remember.
You don't remember? Did you remember that there was both a PE and an FR core available?
I don't recall being aware of an FR panel at the time.
Right. When do you think you did first become aware that Renault Bond ACM came in an FR core version?
I believe after the fire.
Right. Do you remember whether there was any discussion within Harley or the industry generally, from your knowledge and experience at the time, of the availability of ACM panels with an FR core as opposed to a PE core?
I don't recall any conversations.
Right. Can I show you the BBA certificate for the Renault Bond ACM product? It's at BBA 6047, please. It's the certificate number 084510, issued in January 2008, as you can see from the bottom there. Have you ever seen this document before?
I have, but I think as I was saying yesterday, I've seen these documents since. I don't remember if my memory of it is post or pre-fire.
I see. So can we be clear? You didn't, to the best of your recollection, look at this at any time during your involvement on the Grenfell Tower?
I'm unsure.
Right. Let's see how we go with it. Can I ask you, please, to turn to page 3? And you'll see there, page 3, it says, in the third paragraph under General at the top of the page, it is important for designers, planners, contractors and/or installers to ensure that the installation of the cladding is in accordance with the certificate holder's instructions and the information given in this certificate. Did you know, even if you didn't read this document at the time, did you know generally that you had to ensure that the installation of the cladding was in accordance with the certificate holder's instructions and the information in the BBA certificate? Did you know that as a general proposition?
A general proposition in the fact that the people using it to follow that, yeah.
So do you accept that you knew, notwithstanding you hadn't read the certificate, that those installing the rain screen cladding on Grenfell Tower had to follow the instructions of Alcoa, or Arconic, and the information in this certificate?
I mean, I'm unsure what their instructions are or were.
Right. Well, let me see if I can get at it this way. Did you take any steps to ensure that those responsible for the installation of the cladding saw this certificate, even if you hadn't, understood it, and obtained specific instructions from Alcoa as to the installation?
I don't recall doing so.
No. Does that mean that you yourself took no steps to make sure that the installation that Osborne Berry was carrying out was in line with the requirements in the certificate?
As I said, I'm unsure whether I've seen the certificate, so if I hadn't seen the certificate, the answer is no.
Did you ever say to Osborne Berry, or either of them, I haven't seen the BBA certificate, but you must sure you get it and follow it?
I wasn't aware of that as something to ask them.
So is the answer to my question that you did not?
I don't recall.
Now, I think it's right that you drafted the method statement for the installation of the cladding, didn't you?
Correct.
Yes. When you did that, did you review any instructions or directions from Renault-Bond, Alcoa, to make sure that the method statement was in line with the instructions that they gave?
I don't believe so.
Let's look at it. BBA, well, we'll come back to that in a moment, actually. Can I just ask you something else on the certificate? BBA 6047 at page 6, please. And I want to show you section 10 in this same document. And I know you didn't read it, but I just want to show you what it says. 10.2, installers must be trained and approved by the certificate holder who can provide technical assistance at the design stage and at the start of the installation. Did you take any steps to ensure that Osborne Berry were appropriately trained?
I did not.
Did you take any steps to ensure that Osborne Berry were approved by Alcoa, the manufacturers, and therefore the certificate holder?
No.
If we look at section 6 on page 5, just back a little bit, please, it says, at paragraph 6.1, a standard sample of the product with a grey-green Duragloss 5000 coating, when tested for reaction to fire, achieved a classification of BS2D0 in accordance with EN 13501 2002. I know you didn't read it, but did you know that, at least in general terms, that there was a certificate that said those things?
My memory of this in relation to fire was that it was a Class A product.
How did you know that?
I think I was told that.
Do you remember by whom?
I do not.
Okay, but I think what you're telling us is that you learnt that it was a Class 0 product from somebody, but not from reading the certificate.
Correct.
Very well. Were you aware that the BBA certificate specifically recommended the inclusion of cavity barriers around the windows to prevent internal fire spreading to the cladding system?
As I said, on this certificate, I'm unaware of that wording at that time.
Right. Now, let's then turn to the way in which these panels were ordered to site. That's the new topic. Can I ask you to start, please, with RYD 3018272? This is an email from Simon Lawrence to Daniel Anketell-Jones on the 19th of September 2014, and you can see that Ray Bailey is copied in on it, as is Rob Maxwell and Simon O'Connor. Now, this is obviously before you became project manager for Harley, so you may not have seen this email, but he says in it, in the second sentence, the planners have been told that the discussion needs to be made ASAP as the order needs to be placed 3rd of October. And the subject of the email is cladding panels. At the time, were you made aware of that deadline?
I don't believe so.
Right. Now, just as a bit of background, did you know that the decision to use smoke silver rain screen panels manufactured by Alcoa, i.e. Rainabond, was formally agreed on the 30th of September 2014?
I don't know. Didn't know that. No.
Okay. Can I ask you to turn to CEP 60512, please? CEP 60512. This is an email from Mark Stapley to Jeff Blades of CEP, copied to you, 25th February 2015, and he attaches something called ACM panel requirements. And he says, "Hi Jeff, please find attached our cladding panels requirements for Grenfell Tower. Please can you provide us with your most competitive price and also confirm lead times?" Now, by this time, 25th February, you, I think, had taken over as project manager.
I believe I was involved at that time. Yes.
Yeah. And we can see that he's asking for the most competitive price. Are you aware, given that the ACM panels had been formally signed off by planning in September 2014, why it was that Harley didn't start ordering or even obtaining quotes for the fabrication of panels until late February 2015, something like 5 months later?
I don't know.
You don't know. Did you know that CEP had provided a quotation to Harley for the fabrication of ACM panels on the 21st of January 2014?
14.
Yes.
I'm unaware of that.
You didn't know that?
I don't remember.
Okay. Well, we'll come back to that. Can I ask you then to look at the attachment to this email? You'll find that at CEP 60513. And if we go to the first page at the bottom, we have to blow that up. But we can see, I think you'll see there, it says material, Rainabond, finish, smoke silver, metallic Duragloss 5000 satin. You see that?
Yes.
That's Rainabond ACM, isn't it?
I believe so.
Yes. Now, if we look at page 4 of this document, we can see here that this is a list of notional material requirements, Rainabond cladding. And it says that they are to be made of Rainabond cladding. And you can see down the right-hand side the colour, and working your way towards the left, the location, the girth, and the quantity. Neither in the drawing that we saw, the box at the bottom, nor in this list, does it say what the core of the ACM is to be. Do you know why that is?
I don't know why Mark hasn't put that on.
So you don't know why Mark hasn't put that on. Does that tell us that you, at the time, expected or would have expected him to identify the core of the ACM panel?
So my memory of, or my awareness of the product at the time, I think I said yesterday, I wasn't aware of the different cores, and I don't remember it having a PE in the description when I saw it referred to.
No. So was there an assumption that an ACM panel would have a PE core?
I don't think that was an assumption.
You don't think it was an assumption? So if it wasn't an assumption, what was it actually thought about?
It's not something that I ever thought about.
Right. If the core wasn't specified as PE specifically, as opposed to FR, how would CEP as the fabricator know which core to order from Reynabond, Alcoa, if it wasn't set out in the requirements?
I don't know.
You don't know. Well, you were copied in on this email. Was it your assumption at the time that it would just be PE, and that CEP would know or assume that it was to be PE?
As I said before, I didn't have an awareness of the...
Yeah. Can we look at CEP 60528, please? This is an email from you to Neil Wilson at CEP dated the 13th of March, copy to Jeff Blades. And if we turn to the second email down, you'll see that this is a copy of an email sent earlier the same day from Neil Wilson to Mark Stapley at Harley. And you're responding by sending him a purchase order, as we can see from the top email. And in the second email down, to which you are responding, Mr. Wilson says, "Hi, Mark. Following our telecom yesterday, I confirm our revised price for the supply and fabrication of the ACM panels to the above project. Reynabond smoke silver panels as detailed on schedules," and he sets them out, at a price of £127,500, inclusive of discount, ex works. I also confirm we will supply the remainder of the panels yet to be finalised, and then he gives the measurements, making the complete order value around £300,000. Now, it looks from this as if Mark Stapley had asked for a discount from Neil Wilson on the telephone on the 12th of March. That's the telecon yesterday he refers to. And it looks as if he was being given one by Neil Wilson. Do you know whether Harley did ask CEP for a discount on the ACM panels?
I don't know the details of the conversation that Neil's referring to.
You don't know the details. Do you know what discount Mr. Stapley asked for?
I don't.
Do you know why Harley was pushing for a discount from CEP on this order?
I do not.
So you're sent this email because it's at the top of the email chain. Does it follow that you simply didn't have a discussion with Mr. Stapley at all about the discount?
I don't remember.
I mean, you sent him the purchase order. Did you just cut and paste it from something, or did you compile it yourself?
I think from what I saw of the timestamp on the email that I sent, it was an hour or two after this email, so Mark may have asked me just to...
Right.
As I said, it's in order to cover the...
Okay. Now, note the price that's given and the complete order value of around £300,000. We see that. Can I, keeping that in mind, ask you to look at a document, HAR 30s15299, please? This is CEP's original quote of the 21st of January 2014, which I mentioned about 5 minutes ago, and you expressed surprise that it was 2014, I think. This is the original quote by CEP of that date, sent to Mike Albiston and Mark Harris at Harley, and it's the price on which Harley based its tender to Ryden. And if I ask you to go to page 2, you can see on that page that the rain screen price is quoted there by CEP to Harley as £525,394. Given that that was the price quoted in January 2014, are you able to explain why in March 2015 CEP were quoting around £300,000 for the complete order? In other words, around £200,000 cheaper than the initial CEP quote the year before?
I don't know.
Is it fair to say that Harley were able to get the ACM panels from CEP for a far cheaper price than the price that Harley had quoted to Ryden?
Well, I don't remember the price that we quoted to Ryden.
No, but I'm asking you to accept something that I'm putting to you.
Okay.
And I'm suggesting to you that Harley were able to get the panels from CEP for a price that was far cheaper than was quoted to Ryden, on the assumption that what was quoted to Ryden was based on the £525,000 that we saw in the quote given in January 2014.
As I say, I don't know the level of, I don't know the difference between the two, but obviously I wouldn't be surprised that we're paying less for a material than we're selling it for.
Right. You wouldn't be surprised about that. Okay. Was there any discussion, to your knowledge, at the time within Harley about making a turn on the difference between what you were quoted by CEP and what you were quoting to Ryden for these panels?
When you say
Making a turn,
making
a profit, pocketing the difference.
I wouldn't use the term pocketing the difference. I think in a business, there has to be an element of profit, but I don't think pocketing the difference is a phrase that I'd use.
All right. I just wanted to understand how the price build-up worked, but it sounds as if you can't really help me on that.
In terms of the difference in the price we pay and the price we sell it for, I don't know the ins and outs of that, no.
All right. Can you help me with the quotation that was given by Booth Murray? Do you remember anything to do with Booth Murray?
I don't remember that interaction at the time, but I've since seen a quotation from them, yes.
Booth Murray were a cladding fabricator like CEP, weren't they?
Yes.
And did you know that Mr. Stapley had approached Booth Murray and asked them for a quotation? Did you know that at the time?
What, for the whole Grenfell Tower job?
Well, let's look at the document. It's BLM 6014. BLM 6014. Yes, and if we can go to the third page of that email run, please. This is an email from Mark Stapley to Stuart Murden at Booth Murray, dated the 25th of February 2015. And you are copied in on that, as you see. And he says, "Hi Stu, further to our earlier telephone conversation, please find attached our panel requirements for Grenfell Tower. Please can you provide us with your most competitive price and also confirm lead times?" Do you know why Harley approached Booth Murray for a quotation?
Specifically, no.
Right. Now, can we, because you're copied in on this, so when you received this email, but in copy, did it occur to you to find out what was going on given that CEP were also being approached?
Yeah, I don't remember this email.
Right, okay. You don't remember the email. All right, well, let's see how we go on. Can I ask you to go to BLM 709. And if you look at the bottom of the first page, we can see an email from you. This is later in the year, 6th of July 2015, and it's sent to inquiries, and we know that is Booth Muri. And you say, Alan, as discussed, please find drawings attached to quote against for our Grenfell Tower project. Please can you quote an expected lead time as well? I would need these panels on site week commencing 17th of August 2015. Now, we've already seen that CEP had started supplying the Renault bond after you'd sent the purchase order on the 13th of March 2015. Why were you asking Booth Muri for a quote if you'd already engaged CEP to fabricate the panels for Grenfell?
From my recollection of from the time of the deliveries we were getting from CEP, my recollection is that we were not getting the quantities and so the quantities of the types of panels that we'd requested on a schedule. So I think there was concern on that regard of CEP's ability to keep up with progress on site. So I think my recollection is exploring avenues to try and reduce that bottleneck.
Right. And when you sent the emails email in July, early July 2015, did you not look back at the discussions you'd had with Booth Muri earlier in the year?
I don't recall.
Harley had with Booth Muri earlier in the year?
I don't recall.
You don't recall. Right. I'd like to turn to another topic, which is John Hoban, the building control officer for Grenfell Tower. He was one of the building control officers responsible for the Grenfell Tower refurbishment. I think you know that.
Yes.
Can I ask you to look at his statement, please? This is RBK 3033934. And if you go to page 7 in that document, you'll see paragraph 65. And at paragraph 65, you'll see this is an answer to a question asked at paragraph 64. What advice or information was available and what assessments were made about the components that comprised the exterior of the building, their fire safety, fire resistance, and compliance with safety standards, including information or advice from manufacturers of relevant components? And he starts with an answer, or starts his answer at paragraph 65 and says, I was provided with initial drawings and details and discussed the works with the architect and his specialist consultant dealing with fire matters. I also had a brief discussion with the engineer from the contractors installing the cladding system to the exterior of the building at the commencement of the works to the exterior. And then he goes on at paragraph 66. During that discussion, I recall that I was advised by the engineer that tests had been carried out to the metal framework supporting the cladding. I also recall that I was advised that the system had been fitted to many buildings throughout England and Wales, to buildings of a similar height and construction. And then he goes on at 67 to say, I also looked up information on the insulation. And then in the third line, he says, I was also advised at the initial meeting on site by the specialist consultant that the cladding would comply with the standards set out in approved document B. Now, I've read you quite a bit from his statement because I want you to have the entirety of the context for my questions that follow. Now, we know from other documents, and I don't need to show you these, that the initial meeting to which Mr. Hoban is referring took place on the 24th of November 2014. Now, that's before your detailed involvement
Yes.
in the project. Do you remember whether you or someone else from Harley attended a meeting on site with Mr. Hoban on the 24th of November 2014?
I don't recall.
You don't recall. When Mr. Hoban is referring to someone here from Harley as the specialist consultant, can you help me who that might be?
I don't know.
Did you give any assurances to Mr. Hoban at any stage in the way he describes here?
I don't believe so.
And you're sure that it wasn't you who told the specialist consultant that the cladding would comply with the standards set out in approved document B?
Sorry, say that again?
Are you sure that it wasn't you who told him that the cladding would comply with the standards set out in approved document B?
I don't think so.
Now, in your statement, and we don't need to go back to it, you say, and it's paragraph 7, that you attended the site once you did become involved in detail from February 2015, 2 or 3 times per week. When you were there, what were you doing?
Many things.
Can you give me a very summary bullet point list of what you did?
Meeting the people on site from Ryden, meeting our contractors, checking our stocks of materials, seeing where we are, checking the deliveries that have come in for quantities, making sure we're up to date, topped up with fixings, checking mast climbers. I'd also go up the mast climbers and just have a look at the progress of the installation, again with reference to what materials we have on site.
Now, Mr. Hughes, David Hughes of Ryden, when he gave evidence to the inquiry in July, suggested that you might have gone up the mast climbers with Mr. Hoban. Is that correct?
I have a recollection of doing so on at least one occasion, maybe
Right.
2.
He also said that during that time, or his time on the project, and yours, you or one of the other installers would brief Mr. Hoban on the works. Do you remember that?
I think I have a slightly different recollection than Dave does. I think I'd say I remember taking Mr. Hoban up on the mast climber at least once, maybe twice, but that was I was there to operate the mast climber to enable his inspections.
Did you have any other meetings with Mr. Hoban on site,
Other than
other than the one you've just referred to?
I don't believe so.
Did you ever have any meetings with Mr. Hoban anywhere else?
Not that I recall.
So just going back to the one meeting you do recall, which is when you say you took Mr. Hoban up on the mast climber, but to operate the mast climber to enable his inspections, did you accompany Mr. Hoban on his inspection?
On that occasion, yes.
That occasion, yes. Do you remember when that was?
I couldn't give you a date.
Well, can you give me a rough idea of at what stage the refurbishment had reached?
I believe it was the it was before we put the panels on the first of the elevations that we put panels onto. So, in terms of that's a chunk of time, but I have to look at other records to tell you that date.
Let's try it a different way. How soon after February 2015 and your taking over the role of project manager do you think you had that meeting with Mr. Hoban?
I'd be guessing.
Right. And during that meeting or inspection, did you discuss the work that had been done, or the design, or the materials?
My recollection is of Mr. Hoban asking several questions, but I don't remember those questions. It was a long time ago.
Does anything specific stand out to you in your recollection of that meeting?
I mean, I think the questions were generally about the installation and the components, but further to that, I don't really remember.
Were there any particular problems that Mr. Hoban was interested in that you recall?
I don't remember him relaying any problems, no.
Do you remember at all whether there was any discussion of the building regulations or approved document B in relation to any aspect of the cladding that he was inspecting?
Not that I recall.
Was there any discussion at all between you about compliance with any aspect of what you were inspecting?
Again, I don't recall.
And it would follow, would it, that you wouldn't recall? Well, let me ask it. Do you recall either him asking or you giving any assurances about whether the design or the materials or products that you were inspecting with him or he was inspecting with you were compliant with the building regulations and approved document B?
I don't recall.
Can we go to a document, RYD 3082733, please? This is the site inspection report compiled by John Rowan and Partners, who were clerk of the works. And you can see this is dated, well, the inspection is dated 16th of June 2015. And can I go with you, please, to page 2 of the document, towards the bottom of the page, where you'll see a heading. And it's the second entry from the bottom, review site inspection log, building control. You see that?
Yes.
And underneath it says, last building control site visit was the same as before, Friday, 15th May 2015. The only observation was that further details of the cladding fire breaks were required. Ryden to confirm if they have done this. Were you or anyone else at Harley, to your recollection, asked to provide further details on the cavity barriers to Ryden for them to pass to building control?
I don't remember.
This doesn't trigger a recollection with you about discussion of fire breaks or cavity barriers with building control?
I think I remember a site meeting previous to that, and then one of the actions in the meeting minutes were to provide drawings with those locations on. But I don't recall the specifics in this report.
Did you discuss cavity barriers with John Hoban on any inspection that you can remember?
I would imagine so, but I don't have a firm recollection.
Right. Now, just going back to the answer before one, you say, I think I remember a site meeting previous to that. Do you mean the one previous to this one on the 16th of June 2015, or the previous one, as noted here, on Friday the 15th of May 2015?
I think the meeting minutes were from April, I remember.
Right. So you have a recollection of a meeting in April at which, is this right, John Hoban asked...
Oh, no, sorry, no. John Hoban was not at that meeting. It was a Ryden meeting.
Did you provide Mr. Hoban with the drawings that he'd asked for?
Oh, sorry, to be clear, the meeting I'm referring to, it was a Ryden request in April.
Right. Hence my question. Do you remember whether you or anyone else at Harley was asked to provide further details on cavity barriers?
To John Hope, and I don't recall.
Right. Do you remember whether you passed anything directly to building control on cladding fire breaks, as is referred to here? You can see the expression cladding fire breaks.
I think there was discussion of the cavity barriers previous to this.
Was that a discussion you were involved in?
There's quite a long email chain in March, I think.
Yes, indeed, and we're going to come to that later on.
Yes.
But apart from that, and we can read that, and we'll go through it together. Apart from that, do you recall any face-to-face discussions or telephone discussions with John Hoban at which the subject of cavity barriers or fire breaks, as they are referred to sometimes, was discussed?
As before, I don't have a clear recollection of a conversation like that.
Very well. Well, we'll come back to that email chain in due course. Can I then ask you about workshops? Now, during the course of Mr. Crawford's evidence to the inquiry in March this year, he said that there were a number of informal, what he called workshops, with RBKC Building Control, where drawings were discussed. Do you recall any such meetings?
Yes, I remember attending meetings on site where I would sit in on meetings with our team, Ryden, and the architect.
Our team, Ryden, and the architect. My question, though, was whether you recall meetings with RBKC Building Control where drawings were discussed.
I don't recall meetings with Building Control being in attendance.
Right. Leaving aside building control, you say meetings with Ryden and the architect. Were cavity barriers discussed during those meetings?
I believe they would have been. Again, no firm recollection.
Right. Did you ever have any meetings on site with Ryden at which a representative of Studio E was not present?
That's possible.
Do you remember whether any occasion on which building control were provided with drawings of the cladding system as you understood it?
I believe they must have been.
That's not quite an answer to my question. My question is, do you remember any occasion on which building control were provided with drawings of the cladding system as you understood it to be?
I think other than what they would have been provided with, as I say in that email chain I've referred to, I don't have any direct knowledge of any of the details.
Now, you referred earlier on to a single meeting with John Hoban at which you accompanied him up the mast climber. Can I show you paragraph 13 of your witness statement?
Sure.
Page 5. And see if we can get a little bit more on that. You say in paragraph 13, and it's in the middle of the paragraph, but let's start with 5 lines down. You say, in relation to the cladding, that the cladding rails were secured with the correct fixings, correct centres and levels. I then took building control up to see the work. I believe that Taff and Bez, which was Osborne Berry, were also inspecting the work, as I remember asking them at various points, and they would confirm that they were. I recall they also took building control up to see what had been installed prior to the cladding panels being installed when I was not on site. I was not aware of any issues being raised by building control. Now, I just want to focus on where you say I then took building control up to see the work. Is your reference there the reference to the meeting that you're recalling now today?
I believe so.
Yes. And You're sure it was John Hoban you took up? Is it? Are you?
I'm reasonably sure, yes.
Yeah. Did you customarily keep any records of the visits made by RBKC Building Control where you would take them to see the work? Even that one occasion?
I may have made notes of it,
Right.
but I don't have those.
Right. Did you keep a day log or day-to-day diary of what was happening on site?
Not a day-to-day diary, but more of a notebook of various things that would come up or need ordering, things of that nature.
Right.
Sort of reminders.
Do you remember whether your meeting with Mr. Hoban, where you took him up in the mast climber, was something you entered into your notebook?
I don't.
When you went up with him in the mast climber, from what you could see, did Mr. Hoban check every elevation and every floor?
When I was there, I believe so. I believe we'd either travel from the bottom, working our way up, or travel all the way to the top and work our way back down.
Right. Do you remember whether the inspection addressed any more than the framework for the cladding?
I believe he was looking at every element.
So, Sergeant Jordan, it may be my problem, but I'm struggling sometimes to hear what Mr. Bailey is saying.
Right. Well, Mr. Bailey, it is important that we can all hear you without too much difficulty. So can you make sure you keep your voice up as best you can?
Yeah.
Did RBKC Building Control look at the internal works or only the external works?
Sorry. As far as in my experience, I was only there for the external parts with Mr. Hoban.
In respect of the window installations, do you remember what Mr. Hoban looked at in particular?
I don't have a firm recollection.
Can I ask you to turn back a page in your witness statement to the beginning of paragraph 13, which is on page 4. And you say there, in terms of the work done by the installers, I remember that I made ad hoc informal checks to the window shelf angles and weather sealing details before the frames were fitted, as a large part of this work had taken place before I had full involvement in the project. So you say you checked those. Did you also conduct a visual check of the windows and the insulation and the cavity barriers and the cladding rails?
Yes.
Yeah. And a little bit further down that paragraph, you also say that you would generally check, this is about halfway down the paragraph before the bottom of the page, you'd say you would check in relation to the windows that the shelf angles were securely fitted and fixed at the correct centres to retain the window frames, that the EPDM seal to the top of the head angle was applied to a good standard, and to see if any gaps that would allow water ingress around the fixings were sealed, and later on, when the frames had been fitted, that the window frame was securely fitted, free from damage, and foam was applied along the whole length of the frame, that the window jambs were sealed with EPDM to a good standard, and that the mastic seal was applied along the length of the window at the head and base, that the glass and gaskets, if the glass had been fitted at the time, were in good condition, and weather bars and drain caps were fitted. It's a very long sentence. You did all of those things. And on page 5, we can see you then go on to say, in relation to the insulation, that it was securely fitted, fixed to the building, and joints taped and secured. In relation to the cavity barriers, that they were fitted securely with the end of the fixing strap split and bent, joints were taped and secure. In relation to the cladding, that the cladding rails were secured with the correct fixings at correct centres and levels. And that is the work you say you checked, and then you say I then took building control up to see the work. To your knowledge or recollection, did you ever take building control up to inspect the exterior prior or before the panels were installed?
Yes.
You did? So was there an earlier inspection by building control, or just the one that you were referring to?
The visit that I refer to in this is immediately before the cladding panels are installed.
Because when one reads the paragraph, you say, in relation to the cladding, which I think you mean the panels, the cladding rails were secured with the correct fixings and correct centres and levels. I then took building control up to see the work. Do I take it from that at that point, when you took building control up to see the work, the rails were secured with correct fixings and correct centres and levels, but the panels hadn't yet been fitted?
Correct.
That's correct, is it?
Correct,
Right,
yeah.
I see. So that would mean, would it, that the insulation and the cavity barriers would have been visible to Mr. Hoban?
Absolutely.
I see. Now, can I ask you to look at Mr. Hughes's evidence, David Hughes, Brighton, day 27, page 100, please. He says at lines 1 to 14, this is put to him, he's asked a question about building control going up to see what had been installed prior to the cladding panels being installed. And the question that's asked by Miss Grange is, was your understanding that building control would be taken up before the panels were inspected? So this is what he's being asked about. And his answer is, I don't know whether he's getting confused, this is you, getting confused with building control and the clerk of works here. From my statement, from what I remember, we only went up twice with building control up the mast climbers, and those are the ones I said in my statement. So I took them up once when there were still some unfinished panels, and I took them up once with the clerk of works at the same time to do what I would consider to be a handover inspection. Do you agree that you might be getting confused between building control and clerk of works?
No.
No. Do you recall that there were more than 2 inspections, as he says? Sorry, let me put that again. He says that he recalls that there were 2 inspections with building control up the mast climbers. Do you recall that there were 2?
Is Dave... So I think Dave uses the we there, so I'm assuming he means we being me and him. I don't recall going up the mast climber with Dave and building control.
I see.
I think I can be sure about the difference between clerk work and building control, because I do remember the 2 different Johns very clearly in my mind. So I'm confident that the visits I did,
Right.
I think was only me and John Hoban.
Right. Now, it follows from what you're saying is that there was only one building control mast climber trip that you recall, and that was at a time before the cladding panels were fitted. Does it follow from that you never took building control, John Hoban, to see the work after the panels were installed?
I believe those visits were the ones that I was present anyway with the clerk of works.
Sorry, I don't understand that. You say you believe those visits were the ones I was present anyway with the clerk of works? Could you just explain that?
So I think your question was, did John Hoban visit on the mast climb after the panels had been installed?
Yes.
And what I'm trying to say is that, from my recollection, the only person that I can remember taking up in the mast climber once the panels had been installed was the clerk of works.
Right, thank you. Now, we've identified a gap in building control inspections over the summer of 2015. Can you help us with what stage the facade installation had reached between May and October 2015?
I think my recollection is that the plan from the inspection side was to sign off an elevation at a time, and so we would only put panels on the elevations that had been inspected by building control. So as I sit here now, I wouldn't be able to tell you the exact stage we were at.
Right. Do you think the installation of the insulation had been finished by May 2015?
Just by the evidence we saw yesterday with purchase orders for insulation into September and October, I don't think it would have been finished, no.
Yeah. So I think we can take it from that answer, and you're right about the documents, that the insulation was still being fitted after October 2015.
I think it would have been, yes. It's likely that would have been confined to the lower floors.
Right. And what about the rain screen? Do you remember when that started to be fitted?
I think May was suggested as a date yesterday, and I was a little unsure over the specific days, but yeah, it would be May, June kind of time, I think.
Right. I'm trying to get a picture in my head of what building control would have missed if it is the case that they didn't visit between May and October 2015.
Okay.
And can you just help me with what they might have missed?
I think in terms of whole elevations, we wouldn't have put any panels on unless they'd inspected that elevation.
And during that period, if they hadn't visited, what would they not have seen?
As I said, the one visit that they did before the panels went on was of a what was considered to be a complete build-up before the panels went on. So if there was a gap between those months, I don't think any panels would have gone on without a visit on an uninspected elevation.
Right. I see. Now, can we look at paragraph 49 of your statement on page 15, please? Paragraph 49. You say there, as far as I'm able to recall, building control inspections were carried out on each elevation. And then you say, I believe the clerk of works carried out approximately 2 inspections per elevation. As described in detail above, I also carried out checks both before and after the panels were installed. Now, when you say the clerk of works carried out approximately 2 inspections per elevation, what does that mean, or what did that involve?
So my recollection is that the clerk of works visited once the panels had been installed, and the first visit he would capture snags or issues that he found, and then the second visit was to tick those off, ensure they've been done or attended to.
I see.
And that
So,
was each elevation.
so building control would inspect before the panels went on, to the best of your recollection and involvement, but the clerk of the works would only do inspections after the panels went on.
That's the recollection of my involvement, yes.
Right, I see. I've got that clear, have I?
That's how I remember it, yes.
I see. So does that tell us that the Clerk of Works never inspected the insulation and the cavity barriers before the panels were applied?
Not that I was present for.
Not that you were present for. What about those you weren't present for but heard about or knew about or read about?
At the time, I wasn't aware of the Clerk of Works doing those inspections.
Can I ask you to go to HAR 50224, please? Now, this is a photograph of the facade of Grenfell Tower during its construction, and it's been disclosed by Harley. Do you happen to know who took it?
It may have been me.
May have been you. Do you remember when?
I do not.
No. And we can see from the foliage that it's clearly sometime between the spring and the autumn of a particular year. But looking at the stage at which the facade construction has reached, are you able to tell me roughly when during that period?
I couldn't tell you just by looking at the picture.
All right. Now we can see on the photograph that the insulation has been installed to the spandrel panels, can't we?
Yes.
And we can see that cavity barriers have been installed as well. You can see them.
Yes.
We can see, I think, also that no insulation or cladding has been installed to the columns.
Yes.
And that I think we can. Is this right? We can also see that there are some Reynobond cladding cassettes which have been installed onto the panels.
Yes.
The spandrel panels. You see that?
Yes.
Yeah. Now, based on how the cladding installation had progressed to at the point at which you took this photograph, do you know roughly when it was likely to have been taken?
I think I'd need more information to work that out.
Right. What information would you need to know to work it out?
Date stamp on the photo.
Yes, that would obviously be very helpful. But apart from that, looking at the photograph, the contents of the photograph, is there any other information you'd like to know to be able to date the photograph?
I think one thought has sprung to mind.
Yes.
The recollection.
Yes.
That well, I think this is a vague recollection. I think some may have been put on as a way of storing them, to get them out of the very constricted site we had. But they would definitely have been removed before an inspection if this was before an inspection had taken place.
Right.
Without a date.
Mr. Bailey, I'm finding it a little difficult to hear what you're saying.
Sorry, I'll speak a bit closer.
Mr. Renters looks as though he's having a problem too. Can you keep your voice up a bit?
Of course, yes.
When you say, I think some may have been put on as a way of storing them, what is the them? What are you referring to?
The cassette panels.
The cassette panels, right. How does that help us date the photograph?
I don't know if that helps date it, but yeah, I can't help you with the date at this point in time.
All right.
Just a minute, while we've got this on the screen, can you just, for my benefit, if for no one else's, just please help me understand what it is that we can see. We can see on the spandrels insulation with markings on it. Is that right?
I might be able to help with that.
No, I was about to come to that, Mr. Chairman. But let me ask the question. If you look at the spandrel panels, they've got cladding panels on them, and would you agree that they are clearly branded Reno Bond?
Yes, that's the protective film on them.
Ah, right. Thank you.
And that's the protective film. So, I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman, I've interrupted your questions.
No, well, that's all right, because you've answered the one that I was obviously under a misapprehension. Because can we just make sure what we see in this? We see cladding panels with their protective film, coating, whatever, yeah? And above, if we take the second bay from the left as an example, above that we can see a cladding panel without a protective film, or is it something else?
So the one is sort of in the middle on the left, the film's partially removed, and the one to the right of that, the film has been removed.
Right, thank you. Now, but below the one with no film, we see the one of a number of pale yellow material. What are that?
Is that the one with the silver foil on?
That's the insulation with the foil on it, is it?
When you say pale yellow,
Well, below the cladding panel, which has lost its protective film,
yes,
what are we seeing?
there's another.
That's the window infill panel.
Sorry, that's the window. Yeah,
Yes.
okay, yes.
Right. And then we go to the right of the panel, which hasn't got any protective film. On either side, we can see, again, a pale yellow area with what we now know are the cavity barriers. What are we seeing there?
I'm unsure what that is.
Any offering, Mr. Millett?
Yes, it looks as if what you have on the what you have in that section there, is this right? Is the grey rectangle is a Reno Bond cassette without the protective film on it,
Yes.
and to the left and right of that is the unbranded insulation. Yes.
Yes.
And over the top of that, running horizontally in black, is the cavity barrier.
The vertical one's a cladding rail.
They're the cladding rails. And right.
All right. Well, thank you. That's probably as far as we can take that.
Exactly where the cladding rails go, though. And I think it probably is as far as we can take that. Does that tell us that anybody looking at the cladding cassettes would realise, at this stage at least, that they were Reno Bond from the protective film?
Correct.
And we can see that the insulation here is unbranded. Can you tell me which it is?
The Celotex RS5000 had the unbranded four faces.
Do you know how long the cladding panels, the Reno Bond ACM, that is, were left on the building with branding like this? In other words, before the protective film was pulled off?
I think it was sort of quite a long time.
And what about lying in piles in store on site? Would it have been obvious from anybody coming to the site that if they weren't on the building but were kept on the site, and I know you say it was a constricted area, but that they were Reno Bond panels?
I'd say so, yes.
Yes. Do you know if cladding panels were ever present on site, either on the building with the protective layer on them, or in storage on site with the protective layer on them when building control came on a site visit?
My feeling is that they must have been.
Your feeling is they must have been. That's only a feeling. Could you have a recollection?
Not a firm recollection.
Right. At the time you went up the mast climbers with Mr. Hoban, do you remember whether there were any Reno Bond ACM cladding panels on site, either on the building, or whether for storage or final fitting, or in storage on site?
in terms of the first visit that I have a definite recollection of, they may have been on site, and the second visit I said I wasn't crystal clear about if that had taken place. There would have been panels on the wall, I expect.
Right. Mr. Chairman, I'm going to turn to a different topic. It's a little early for the break, and I'm happy to continue. Perhaps should continue.
I'd like to see if you can run for another 10 or 15 minutes.
Certainly. I'm going to turn to the subject of cavity barriers now,
Okay.
and I want to ask you one or two very general questions, first of all. Were you aware of the fact that the NBS specification expressly required the design of a system which conformed to the CWCT standard for systemized building envelopes?
Not in those explicit terms, no.
Right. I think you told us yesterday that you were aware of the existence of the organisation, CWCT, but you hadn't read the standard.
Yes.
Right. Were you aware at the time of your involvement as project manager on the Grenfell Tower project of the functional requirement in the building regulations that the building should be designed and constructed so that the unseen spread of fire and smoke within concealed spaces in its structure and fabric is inhibited?
Again, in those explicit terms, no, but it's a concept I was aware of.
Right. That's functional requirement B3, sub-requirement 4. But you didn't know it in terms, but you knew it in general. Did you understand that there was such a thing as a cavity barrier?
Yes.
Yes. What did you understand the purpose of a cavity barrier to be?
To slow down the unseen spread of fire and smoke.
And had you also heard of something called a fire stop?
Yes.
Did you understand that there was a difference between a fire stop and a cavity barrier?
Yes.
What did you understand that difference to be?
A fire stop would be between a slab edge and an internal wall, and that would provide a 2-hour rating similar to what concrete would, and a cavity barrier sits on the outside of the building.
Right. Do you know who it was who specified the type of cavity barriers that should be used on Grenfell Tower?
Type in terms of
In type
product. So what, Lamatherm.
Yeah, Lamatherm.
I think that might be in the NBS spec.
Right. Did you yourself undertake any investigations with the manufacturer of the Lamatherm, which is Siderise, as to whether they had been tested in a rain screen system?
I think that's implied by the literature.
Right. Can we go to Mr. Lamb's evidence? This is the transcript for day 37, and I'd like you to go, please, to page 172. Page 172, and I'd like to start at line 12. Now, Miss Grange is asking Mr. Lamb some questions here, and at line 12, and she asks him, in the context, there was talk about cavity barriers around window openings, and a question is at line 15. Can you just tell us when there was talk about cavity barriers around window openings? Answer, around the table at Harley. And who did you have those discussions with? Answer, by this point it may well have been Ben, certainly Ray. And can you help us as to what was discussed about cavity barriers around windows? Only the broad requirement, whether there was a requirement and it was deemed that the architect's drawings showed explicitly what was required and our drawings were issued for him to comment upon and which he approved fully. see that. Do you recall any meetings at which you were present, as Mr. Lamb puts it, around the table at Harley?
Yeah, I think certainly we had meetings that I was present at.
Right. And was any of those meetings, do you remember where the cavity barriers were discussed, or the cavity barrier strategy?
Not with any clarity.
Not with any clarity. Do you remember whether you attended round-table meetings with Kevin Lamb at Harley at which cavity barriers were discussed, even if you don't remember the details?
I'm sure they would have been.
Do you recall whether specific consideration was given to putting cavity barriers around the windows?
I'm unsure.
You're unsure. In general terms, would you agree that the specification, the NBS specification, would take precedence over the drawings?
I think, as the architect, reviewing our drawings as well, I think, we expect what the architect puts on their drawings or comments on our drawings to, that we follow through with.
Do you accept that the NBS specification, at least in respect of cavity barriers around the windows, wasn't prescriptive? It was a performance spec.
If that's what you're putting to me, I can't remember what it says to agree or disagree.
Right. Well, let me ask it this way. If you had thought that there was a difference between the requirements of the NBS spec on the one hand and the drawings on the other, then the NBS spec would take precedence.
I think my view, looking back at it, it's the other way around.
Right. When there was a divergence between the two, did you think that it was appropriate to refer the matter back to the architect for clarification?
I think the architect was. We did query the cavity barriers with the architect, so.
You did in a specific respect, and we're going to come to that in a moment, but just in general terms, if you had come across a divergence between the drawings on the one hand and the NBS spec on the other, would you have referred that back to the architect for him to clarify which should take precedence?
Possibly.
Right. Do you remember doing so?
I don't remember.
Okay, let's then turn to the run of emails in March 2015. Mr. Chairman, this is, as you know, I think already a fairly labyrinthine exercise.
Yes, would it be
I'm going
better
to try and take it shortly.
have
if
a
I
break
can. It would be.
before we do that?
Yes.
Yeah, well, Mr. Bailey will have a break now then. We'll come back at 25 to 12, please.
Okay, thank you very much.
And remember not to talk to anyone about your evidence or anything relating to it while they're out of the room.
Thank you.
All right, good. I'd like to go with the usher, please. Thank you. Thank you. 25 to 12, please. Would you ask Mr. Bailey to come back in, please? Right, Mr. Bailey, all ready to carry on?
I am.
Good, thank you very much. Yes,
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Bailey, earlier on this morning I was putting to you some questions about the frequency of building control visits to site,
Yeah.
and I put to you questions on the footing that there were no visits between May 2015 and October 2015. In fact, we have been corrected by that by RBKC, and there is some evidence that there was a meeting or a visit on site around about the 17th of August 2015 by building control to the Grenfell Tower site. Now, with that correction in mind, do you recall what, in that 2-month period, June and July, where there were no building control visits, happened in terms of the progress of the installation of the cladding, of the rain screen and the insulation?
It would have been progressing, but in specifics,
Right.
I don't remember.
And do you remember what stage the installation had reached in about mid-August 2015?
Again, without any certainty, I'm sat here now. It's likely that the west, north and east elevations would have been progressing.
Right.
But that's as much as I can tell you.
Okay. And as at August 2015, were any Rainabond cassette rain screen panels on site yet?
I believe they would have been.
Okay. Now, do you recall any conversations at all with John Hoban of Building Control about the cladding?
Other than in general terms, not specifics.
If Mr. Hoban had been having discussions with the specialist subcontractor for the cladding, who would it have been on site? Who would it have been if it hadn't been you?
It could have been one of the site supervisors from Osborne Berry, who I think also accompanied him on some visits.
And who can you name them?
So they Mark Osborne and Paul Graham Berry.
Right. But they're not from the specialist subcontractor. They are the specialist subcontractor's sub-subcontractor for installation only, aren't they?
Yes.
Can you explain why, as project manager for the specialist subcontractor on this project, to the best of your recollection, you had so little interaction with building control?
I think, and my experience on my previous site, where building control visits were handled by the main contractor, on this job, I thought it was unusual that we were being asked to deal directly with building control. I get this. I get the sense that that's unusual.
So do you think, to the best of your recollection, that Mr. Hoban, when he refers to specialist consultants, is not referring to you, but somebody else? Remember the passages from his statement I referred you to earlier.
But I think he said that was in a meeting, wasn't it?
Let's then turn to the March 2015 emails. Can we start with your witness statement, please, at paragraph 37? It's on page 11. You say there at paragraph 37, in relation to the cavity barriers installed at Grenfell in around March and April 2015, I was involved in, or being copied into, or having forwarded to me, email correspondence between Ryden, Studio E, Harley and Siderise, Chris Mort and Ricky Kay, National Facades Manager, as well as RBKC Building Control, John Hoban, discussing what the cavity barriers / fire stopping requirement was. And then you go on to say, as Siderise were the specialists, their advice was sought. However, the final decision in relation to what was installed reflected the advice of John Hoban, RBKC Senior Building Control Surveyor. Now, the first question is, would it be normal in your admittedly limited experience at the time for the requirement of cavity barriers to be the subject of widespread discussion, such as that we see in the email run, when work on site had already been started?
No, because I think this stemmed from a specific question.
I see. It did stem from a specific question, but would it be normal in your admittedly limited experience for that specific question to be raised at a time when work on site had already been started?
I don't know.
Right. Can we look at the emails then? Start with SEA 30129553, please. Now, this is an email dated the 18th of March 2015 from you to Neil Crawford at Studio E and Simon Lawrence at Ryden, copied to, among other people, Daniel Anketel-Jones and John Hoban. You see that?
Yes.
And you are responding, as we can see lower down page 1, to an email from Neil Crawford earlier in the month, 10th of March 2015, to Kevin Lamb, on which you were copied. And this is where Neil Crawford is sending Kevin Lamb Paul Hanson of RBKC's response relating to the question about cladding fire breaks. So that's the background to it. I don't think I need to go through all that. And you then say to Neil Crawford and Simon Lawrence in the second, I'll show you the whole thing, but I want to focus on the second sentence. But you start by saying the fire break supplier, who it seems was involved with Grenfell at the specification stage, has made a comment, and I'd like to clarify what fire breaks are required. Could you confirm what the vertical and horizontal requirement is, please? The spec and supplier technical rep say very different things. When you say very different things, what did you mean?
To my recollection, it was the insulation and integrity value of the cavity barriers.
Who was saying one thing and who was saying another?
So the specification, I believe, was for a higher period of resistance. The technical rep gave a lower, based on an excerpt from approved document B.
Yes, I see. Now, following that exchange, we can see that on the 25th of March 2015, you were then copied into an email from Kevin Lamb. That's at HAR 30177781. If we can just have that up, please. So this is the next week. And Kevin Lamb sends Simon Lawrence a raft of drawings as the attachments, and you are copied in among other people. Do you see that?
Yes.
And it says, Simon, further to our meeting yesterday, please find attached details for the fire breaks, all now upgraded to 120 minutes. Do you know why Kevin Lamb had upgraded the resistance of the cavity barriers?
I think that was to reflect an architect's drawing.
Did you have your own view at the time as to the appropriate integrity and insulation time?
No, I was following the architect's lead on that.
Right. Do you know why you were being copied in on this?
part of the project team on the job. So
Right. And you had asked a specific question, as we've seen from the email we looked at earlier.
yes,
Had you had a clear answer to your question by this point?
by that point, I think not.
Right. Now he says, does Mr. Lamb, in his email to Simon Lawrence, further to our meeting yesterday, so that would be the 24th of March 2015, were you at that meeting, do you think?
I don't recall.
You don't recall. Do you recall anything about that meeting?
No.
Right. Do you know from discussions with those who were or might have been at that meeting what was discussed at that meeting?
I don't remember. Sorry, I don't remember.
Okay, now let's go on to HAR 404002, please. This is an email from you, Mr. Bailey, to Ricky Kay at Ciderise, dated the 27th of March 2015, copied to Kevin Lamb and Mark Stapley, and also Sue Shepherd. It's in response to, as you can see below, the email from Ricky Kay to you of the same day, a little bit earlier that day. And you can start, I've shown you the top of the email so you can see you were part of the chain. Let's then go to the bottom email on page 3, because this is how it ends, but let's see how it starts. It starts the day before, when you send Ricky Kay an email on the 26th of March. Hi Ricky, as discussed yesterday, could you forward the relevant building regs to support the advice that 30/15 fire breaks are what is required? I've got to have this approved by the client before I can order anything, so time is of the essence. Now, it looks as if this email followed a conversation that you'd had with Ricky Kay. Do you remember it?
I don't know if I remember this specific conversation, but I do recall some conversations with Ricky.
Right. Do you remember in general terms the gist of the conversation that you had the day before this email, 25th of March?
I'm unsure of the conversation I had on that date.
You're unsure of it. Do you have any recollection at all of what it was about?
I think originally we made an order for cavity barriers that reflected the 120-minute requirement that we were given. And I think this whole issue came up when Ciderise, the supplier, questioned why we were ordering and what they were for. And I think their reaction was, that's not required. So I think just by reading that could be the conversation
Right.
we'd had.
Okay. Now, you asked him to forward you the relevant building regulations. Is that because you yourself were not familiar with them?
At that time, yes.
Yeah. So you were wholly dependent on Ciderise, the manufacturer and seller, for advice about building regulations in the context of this question?
Me at that time, yes.
Yes. Was there some pressure on site to avoid having to specify the cavity barriers with a fire resistance of 120 minutes, as had earlier been requested by, or required by, Mr. Hoban?
As I said, the only resistance I say we met was from Ciderise.
Right. Now, scrolling up the email chain, we can see that Mr. Kay then sends you an extract from Table A1. We just scroll up to page 2, please. He sends you an extract from Table A1 from approved document B, and that confirms that the appropriate integrity and insulation of a cavity barrier was 30 for integrity and 15 for insulation. You got that in response to his request, didn't you?
Yes.
Yes. And did you study that?
I remember looking at that, yes.
Yes. And he says, underneath the extract, here you can see that it clearly states that 30 minutes fire integrity and 15 minutes insulation is all that is required from a cavity fire barrier. And he goes on to explain why. And then he goes on to say in the last sentence, RH 259030 will offer 90 minutes fire integrity and 30 minutes fire insulation, therefore exceeds minimum requirements. Then he says 120-minute fire rating is generally the industry standard for curtain wall to concrete slab edge fire stopping, where the fire stop is located on the inside of a building and is considered to be a continuation of the floor slab. Now, did what he says there reflect your understanding of the distinction between cavity barriers and fire stopping?
I think that helped me clarify it for me, yes.
Right. It helped you clarify. Okay, let's then look at RYD 3037117. So we come out of this email chain and look at another. And this is Ray Bailey to Simon Lawrence on the 27th of March now, copied to you and also to Kevin Lamb and Daniel Ankertle-Jones. Hi, Simon. Reading the email from the specialist supplier's facade manager, it should be fairly straightforward. A fire stop is required to stop fire spreading between floors or party walls if it's inside the building, i.e. inside of the window or curtain wall. A cavity barrier is required to stop fire spreading inside the cavity. For the fire to enter the cavity, it has to have gone through the window or curtain wall. In our situation, the cladding is outside of the windows and therefore it should have a cavity barrier as opposed to a fire stop. Again, did that email, when you saw it, reflect your understanding of the distinction between cavity barriers and fire stopping?
Yes.
And if we turn then to the email at the bottom of page 1 from Neil Crawford, to which this is a response to a response, if you see, because you've got Simon Lawrence's intervening. Neil Crawford's to Simon Lawrence, bottom of page 1 over to page 2, says, and you would have seen this at the time because you got Ray Bailey's email. You can see what he says there. And he says, hi Simon, have spoken with John and he wasn't happy with Harley's email as we are talking about fire stopping as opposed to cavity barriers. I've explained again the specifics of our scenario and he will have a conversation with Paul Hanson to see if there's a reduced spec they can agree to and will then speak to Harley's directly. So you could see the exchange. What was your impression at this stage when you got the email from Ray Bailey attaching this string below it, including what Neil Crawford is telling Simon Lawrence? What was your impression of the professional's understanding of the differences between fire stopping and cavity barriers?
I think there was a confusion.
There was a confusion. Did that concern you? Did it concern you that there appeared to be a significant level of confusion among the professionals, as shown by this chain, even at this late stage of the process?
So I recall another conversation with Ricky Kay, where he had, this is my recollection, he'd said to me that this confusion between cavity barrier and fire stop in regards to rain screen cladding was a confusion that they'd come across before.
Really? When did you have that conversation?
It may have been in the same conversation I spoke about earlier on. And actually Siderise had produced a drawing. It's like, I don't know if you're familiar with it, it's like a cruciform type drawing, and it does help clarify the difference between a cavity barrier and a fire stop.
Right. Well, we may need to explore that in a bit more detail. But let's just stick with this email chain. Can I ask you to go, please, to HAR 406585? This is another part of the earlier email chain we were looking at earlier. If we go to the bottom email, if we go to the very last page of this email run, please, we can see this is the email we looked at earlier, the one from Ricky Kay of the 26th of March 2015, where he sends you the extract from approved document B. And if we then scroll up, we can see that you send this excerpt to Simon Lawrence. I'm sorry, you should start at the bottom of page 2. Here it is. Ben Bailey to Simon Lawrence and Simon O'Connor, copied to others, including Ray Bailey, 26th March. And then over to page 3, we can see what you say. You say, as discussed, please see the email below from the fire brake supplier. There is quite a large cost difference between what Siderise and the spec recommend, and upgrading to the 120 mins barrier we discussed on Tuesday. Can you forward this to the client's representative for approval, please? Is it fair to say, Mr. Bailey, that the additional cost influenced the decision to try to get a lower specification cavity barriers approved?
I don't think so.
Did you consider whether the potential reduction in cost would have any knock-on effect on fire safety?
No.
Now, scrolling up further, we can see that Mr. Lawrence, Simon Lawrence of Ryden, sends the email to Neil Crawford at Studio E, and you can just see it at the top of the page there on page 2. Go up, middle of the page, that's it. Hi, Neil. Following Tuesday's design meeting, Harley via the supply chain are questioning the rating of the cladding fire brakes. Apparently, by going to 2 hours, as we discussed, it has a cost increase of around £12,000. The supplier is saying it only needs to be 30 minutes everywhere, as per the regs extract below. Could you take a look to see what you think and discuss with John Hoban, please? You see that?
Yes.
And then we can see that Ray Bailey sends this email to Daniel Anketel-Jones. Again, I'm afraid it comes out of this chain. It's HAR 406585. And he asks him for his comments. Do you see? He says, it's the second email down on that page. Dan, do you have any comments, Ray? Do you see that?
Yes.
And you weren't copied in on that. Were you aware of that email?
I was not at the time.
Right. And we then see Mr. Anketel-Jones's reply. If we scroll down a little bit, or scroll up rather, to the top of page 1, or a little bit higher on page 1, we could see Daniel Anketel-Jones's response to Ray Bailey. And again, you're not copied on that, but he says just that it's ridiculous. There's no point in fire stopping. As we all know, the ACM will be gone rather quickly in a fire. The whole point is to stop, quotes, unseen, unquotes, fire spreading in the cavity and moving to other parts of the building. Were you aware of this email?
No.
Did you have any discussion with either Mr. Anketel-Jones or Ray Bailey about its contents, about the subject matter?
I don't think so.
Now, we can see that Mr. Anketel-Jones appears from this to realise and says, as we all know, the ACM will be gone rather quickly in a fire. Now, I know there's a semicolon between the as we all know and the statement, the ACM will be gone rather quickly in a fire. Did you know that there was no point fire stopping because ACM would be gone rather quickly in a fire?
No.
No. Can I then turn to another part of the subject at the same time, late March 2015, on the subject of cavity barriers? HAR 406560. And if we can start, please, at page 7 of this email chain. It starts on the 26th of March 2015. And this is where the email chains weave in and out of the previous email chain that I was showing you before. If we start at page 7, we can see the email that we looked at before at 13:42 on the 26th of March from Mr. K to you, where he sends you the extract from ADB. We've looked at that before. But then we scroll up and we can see that on the 27th of March 2015, Neil Crawford sends this on. It looks as if he sends this on to the building control officer, John Hoban at RBKC, copy to Terry Ashton and Paul Hanson. And you see that. And then above that, Mr. Crawford, on the 30th of March, tells John Hoban, Ben Bailey from Harley's is who you might ask for. You see that?
Yes.
And he gives your phone number. Can you explain why Mr. Crawford might have been giving John Hoban your details for him to talk to you?
I can't speak for Neil. I don't know.
It looks from this as if Neil Crawford thought that you were the contact point at Harley, so far as building control were concerned. Would that be right? Were you the contact point at Harley for building control?
I don't think my role is a technical role in terms of being able to agree, specifically discuss these things with John Hoban, but I could probably facilitate that discussion
Right.
with our team.
Well, maybe we'll come. Well, maybe we can deal with that now. We can see that. Do you remember whether you had a discussion with Mr. Hoban
I'm unsure.
at this time about cavity barriers?
On the phone, I'm unsure.
You're unsure. That means you might have done or might not have done, but you can't recall.
Okay, I don't remember.
Well, I mean, you tell me. Can you remember anything about having a discussion with Mr. Hoban on the telephone or even face-to-face about cavity barriers in late March 2015?
The only discussions I remember having with John Hoban is via email.
Right.
In relation to this.
In relation to this, thank you. So then can we go back to the email chain and then look up a little bit, please, to page 5. We can see there that John Hoban replies on the 30th of March 2015 at 14:22 to pretty much everybody. You see that, including you. So you got this email.
Yes.
And he says, I would advise, and this is in the second paragraph, I suppose it's really the main paragraph, I would advise you that it is my interpretation of diagram 33 of approved document B is that the detail between compartment floors and external cladding is not a cavity barrier, therefore it must be fire stopped to at least the standard of the existing compartment floor, 120 minutes. Therefore, the methods described in clause 9.13 would not be appropriate in this particular case. What did you understand by that response there?
I think at that point in time, it didn't make sense to me, and I didn't feel that I was able to make an interpretation of that.
It looks as if, and would this be right, that Mr. Hoban thought that the gap between the compartment floor and the external cladding needed a fire stop of 120 minutes?
So my understanding at the time was that I'm being told two different things basically by different people, and I didn't have a particular understanding of that requirement at the time.
What was the purpose, did you think at the time, of being copied in on this exchange?
For information.
Okay. And what information did you glean from this communication?
That John Hoban had a different interpretation to what Siderise had.
All right. Now, we then see the response from Ricky Kay, just at the top of the page. It's you have to go to page 4 at the bottom to see the full email. Let's just quickly do that. Very bottom of page 4, Ricky Kay, 30th of March 2015. And then if we can go to the top of page 5, we can see that you are copied in. In fact, you're a recipient of it along with John Hoban. You're not just a copy party, you're actually a recipient. All please can someone forward over a drawing of the build-up of the cladding so that my technical officer can evaluate and forward an official response with the Siderise product specification. And I think, in fact, you then sent him a drawing later the same afternoon. If we look at that, that's HAR 406560, page 2. So you then respond to him and send him the drawings representing the window head and the window sill. You see that? Because we don't have a drawn detail to cover what Chris is requesting. So you respond to his request. And then if we scroll up to page 1 on this email chain, this is the email sent to you by Chris Mort on the 30th of March 2015, a little bit later in that afternoon. And he says this: "Hi, Ben." And it's this copy to Ricky Kay and nobody else. "Hi, Ben. I have reviewed the drawing sent over and sketched a proposal to alleviate the issues raised by the BCO. Also, on the second page of the attachment, I've highlighted the weak link, so to speak, in terms of fire, and I think the BCO would also have noticed this." You see that?
Yes.
What did you understand by that passage there?
I think I interpreted that passage along with the drawings they attached to that email, and my understanding or interpretation of that email then and now is that they were intending to provide it a solution for a fire stop to satisfy the BCO.
And he goes on in the next paragraph to explain his proposal, and he says that it requires the installation of a 90/60 product in 2 layers, one at the head of the window aligning with the compartment floor and the other at the top of the existing upstand, therefore 2 layers of 60 minutes protection that overall would provide, if tested, over 120 minutes protection at the window locations. And he's providing that as a solution to the difference in opinion between building control on the one hand and the on-site contractors on the other, isn't he?
I think it's a difference of opinion between Siderise and BCO. I think.
Well, was the solution that he was proposing ever communicated to Mr. Hoban?
I don't believe it was.
Given what Mr. Mort says, I think the BCO would also have noticed the weak link he refers to. Did you not take up with Mr. Hoban whether he had noticed it or not, or what he thought about it?
No, but I think I should say again, my interpretation of that email is as I explained to you, and I think quite quickly after we received this, there was another. I tried to explain the cruciform diagram to you earlier on. I think there was a reply to that saying that from BCO saying that made it a lot clearer for him, and that they agreed with our interpretation or Siderise's interpretation.
Well, let's just stick with what we've got at the moment. Your reaction to this is to send this on to Ray Bailey and Kevin Lamman and Mark Stapley, as we can see at the top of the page, and you say still going round in circles.
Yes.
Right. You told us a moment ago that you didn't pass on the proposed solution that Siderise were recommending to the building control. Why was that?
Again, because my interpretation of that diagram was that they were offering a solution to offer a 120-minute fire stop cavity barrier. And quite shortly after this email was received, there was a clarification from the BCO.
Given what Chris Mort had said about the weak link, and namely that there was a weak link in terms of fire, and that he thought the building control officer would have noticed it, why did you not think to pass his concern about a weak link in terms of fire to John Hoban?
I've read that issue in the context of a 2-hour fire stop, which was then later on the advice we received was that was not required.
We'll come to the drawing in a moment, which explains exactly where the weak link was. But just on this email for the moment, did you not think to pass the concern about a weak link in terms of fire to Neil Crawford?
I think my answer is the same to that. That's what I've previously answered.
And would the answer be the same to explain why you didn't, as far as we can see, pass the concerns to Simon Lawrence?
Yes.
Kevin Lamb?
I think Kevin Lamb was copied in on the forwarded email.
What about Daniel Anketel-Jones? He wasn't, was he?
He was. I don't think he was.
Now, is it fair to say that you were alerted by this email that in order to alleviate the weak link that Mr. Mort had identified, Harley should install a cavity barrier at the window head and another at the top of the upstand? You were alerted to that?
I don't think so.
Why is that? Why don't you think so?
My understanding of what the email said and what the drawing showed was that their proposal was to try and achieve the 120-minute rating that the PCO was asking for, and that the weak link, as he refers to, was part of the issue in achieving that. It's all in that. It's all read in that context.
Well, let's look at the picture, the drawings then. We can see that Mr. Mort had confirmed in the email that without specific details of the overall construction of internal linings or site of fire strategy for the project, he could only offer the proposal. Did you not think to send him specific details that he was lacking and ask him to consider the proposal afresh or revise it in any way?
I think I'd already requested that information from Simon Lawrence, and I've been told it didn't exist.
Right. Well, let's just look a little bit more closely then at what he was saying. If we can look at the attachment to his email, it's at HAR 403948. This is what he sent you. And at page 1, we can see a drawing with the 90/60 times 2 equals 180/20 on it. Yes?
Yes.
And that was the proposal, wasn't it, to alleviate the issues raised by the BCO? Yes?
I think, the issue being his different interpretation.
Indeed. But that was that. And then if we look at page 2, where he's talking about the weak link in his email, that is where he identifies a weak link for fire. Do you see that?
Yes.
So he's got a proposal which deals with the times, to put it broadly, but he's also identified a weak link for fire. Do you see that? And you saw that at the time, presumably?
Yes.
Did you study this drawing at the time?
I saw it at the time, yes.
Yes. So you would have known that Chris Mort had identified a weak link for fire in the area identified in that second picture, yes?
And it was interpreted in the context of the text of his email and the previous drawing.
Right. Now, let's take this in stages. Going back to the first drawing, at the right-hand side we can see a hand-drawn plan. Can you see it?
Yes.
Which corresponds to the orange line that bisects the window.
Yes.
You could see the orange line bisecting the window, and then the plan on the right. And the blue section is labelled window. Can you see in manuscript with a little arrow?
Yes.
And at the head and the sill of the window, we can see that Chris Mort has drawn some orange cavity barriers. Yes?
Yes.
Now, did you therefore see at the time that showed that Mr. Mort thought that cavity barriers were required in those locations at the window head and the window sill?
I think it shows the cavity barrier above the bracket that holds the head of the window.
I think you're agreeing with what I'm putting to you in that answer. In other words, that Mr. Mort thought that cavity barriers were required in the locations he's identified.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if I'm agreeing with you. I think he shows it above the bracket that holds the head of the window.
Well, we can see that, but it's above, maybe above the bracket, but it's just above the head of the window.
It's above
Yes.
the window, yes.
And also, if you look at the bottom of it, just below the blue oblong, it's just below the sill. Yes. Almost immediately below the sill.
Yes.
Yes. Thank you. And you could see that from at the time when you got this drawing.
Yes.
Yes. And then, if we go to page 2, we can see that here is the drawing of the window head, upper levels. And Mr. Mort has circled the window joint at the head there with a cloud of orange, a bubble. And there's written weak link for fire. And you saw that at the time, yes?
Yes.
Yes. Given that there was a weak link, as he has identified, did you not consider that it was vital that cavity barriers were placed at the head of the window?
I don't believe that was shown on the previous drawing, so no.
When you say the previous drawing, you mean the one immediately above it?
Correct. As I said, I was reading this all in the context of the same issue.
But Mr. Mort's head of window cavity barrier is a lot lower down towards the head of the window. It's immediately above the head of the window than the one shown on the Harley drawing, isn't it?
He's drawn it above the bracket, as we have.
Well, yours is a lot further above the bracket than his.
I disagree.
Why do you disagree?
To me, it looks representatively a similar drawing.
Well, it doesn't with great respect, does it? Mr. Mort's head of window cavity barrier is drawn immediately above the bracket with no space for insulation in it, whereas the Harley drawing is quite a way above the bracket with a chunk of insulation below it. I mean, that's obvious from what we're looking at, isn't it?
The window bracket on our drawing, to my eye, looks like it extends 250 mil above the slab edge, and the cavity barrier is maybe 10, 20 millimetres above that. I think on the sketch that Mr. Moore provides, it's a similar distance apart. It's obviously a smaller scale, but
If Mr. Mort was satisfied with your location of the cavity barriers, did it occur to you to ask yourself why he thought it was necessary to add in orange his own identification of where he thought cavity barriers should be, as he has done on this first drawing.
On the, is this? Could you show me the first drawing, please?
Yes, it's on. Yes, of course. If you scroll up there.
And your question again was?
My question again is, if Mr. Mort was of the view that he thought it was necessary to add in orange his own identification of where he thought cavity barriers should be, why do you think he did that when he could see that you'd already added cavity barriers in your locations?
Again, my understanding of this diagram is it's in response to the BCO's specific, or it's a response to alleviate that issue about the 120 rating. That's my understanding of this.
So I'm just sorry to interject with that. I'm anxious for us not to be misled about what this diagram shows and what it doesn't. I don't think there's any suggestion that Mr. Mort's diagram is to scale.
Well, what the witness is saying, as I've understood him, is that Mr. Mort's manuscript drawing shows the cavity barrier at the head of the window, just above the bracket supporting the head of the window, and the drawing also shows that, but that I think he suggests that the apparent difference may be attributable to the length of the bracket in the full-scale drawing. I think that's what you were saying, wasn't it?
Yeah, yes.
Right, but it doesn't quite answer Mr. Millett's question, which is why on page 2, can we throw up page 2, please? Mr. Mort has identified what he regarded as a weak link for fire around the around the junction between the bracket and the head of the window itself.
Yes.
See that?
Yes.
So I think the question you were being asked to consider is, what did that indicate to you?
As I said, I've read the two drawings in context of what was written in the email, and that they're pointing out that would be an issue in terms of achieving the 120-minute rating that the BCO was asking for. I think I can't say more than that.
Well, let me try and get at it this way, Mr. Bailey. You could see, if we go to the bottom of the drawing on page 2 there, that Mr. Mort had identified a weak link for fire around the head of the window. If he was happy with the position of the cavity barrier as shown on that drawing, why did you think at the time that he had thought that the head of the window presented a weak link for fire?
I don't know.
Did you not think to ask him?
I didn't.
It's quite a serious warning, isn't it, for a manufacturer who has provided you with some expertise on approved document B, to be warning you that the design, as Harley had presented it, offered a weak link for fire. It was a serious matter, was it not?
I think, looking at it now, if they thought that other than the context I've already told you, I've read it in, and I believe that's my interpretation. If they thought that was going to be an issue that was not related to a 2-hour stop, they would have marked in a different cavity power on that drawing. They've marked up another drawing with the cavity powers. Why not this one?
Why didn't, I'll ask my question again. When you were told that the drawing of the head of the window represented a weak link for fire, why did you not go back to Mr. Mort and ask him what he meant?
I don't know.
Why did you not take this to the architect and say, the manufacturer has identified a weak link for fire on our drawings, could you please help us?
because I read it in the context of a 120-minute fire stop, and that issue was shortly afterwards cleared up, to my recollection.
This is not about a 120 issue fire stop. This drawing is about a weak link for fire, which has been created by the position of the cavity barrier, isn't it?
I disagree. My reading of it at the time is what I've told you.
Did you yourself check the drawings when it came to the installation of the cavity barriers?
Obviously, I'd reviewed the drawings, so I knew what to expect on site.
Did you, well, were you surprised that cavity barriers had not been included in the drawings around the windows?
No.
Can you explain why that is?
At that time, I didn't know of a requirement to do so.
Right. Does it follow from that you didn't alert anyone at Harley or Studio E or Ryden, or indeed anybody, that there were no cavity barriers around the windows provided for in the drawings?
I wasn't aware of the issue, so...
Right. Even though Chris Mort had identified weak link for fire at the end of March 2015.
He doesn't indicate cavity barriers directly around the windows, so I wasn't alerted to that issue.
Well, we can agree or disagree about what the drawings show. I've been through that with you. Let's move on. RYD 3037478, please. Now, this is an email also on the 30th of March 2015 from you to Simon Lawrence, copied to Simon O'Connor at 17:15. Simon, is there a building fire strategy document and some information on internal finishes so that you can send over for me to pass on to Siderise? And I think this follows on from, because it's later in the day on the 30th of March, and follows on from Chris Mort's email to you of that day where he refers to the weak link, because we saw that was at 16:21.
Yes.
And this one's going at 17:15, so just under an hour later. Did Chris Mort's email to you prompt you to ask Simon Lawrence whether there was a building fire strategy document, do you think?
Yes.
And Mr. Lawrence responds at 9:37 the next morning, 31st of March, and he says, "Morning, Ben, yes, there is, but it only relates to the bottom 4 levels where we are constructing new. As we are constructing new, the fire ratings are in line with the current regs, approved document B. Anything above that is existing, and there is no record showing what fire rating the slabs and walls, internal and external, were constructed to when the building was originally built back in 1974. We know that it's unlikely that the party walls, etc., would be in line with current regs. However, this can't be proved without extensive surveys and specialist analysis. Unfortunately, that's what you get with refurb, and because we can't prove otherwise, the building control officers will revert to current regs on a better to be safe than sorry approach." Now, I've read you all of that because I want you to see everything he's saying, but he says there the fire strategy only related to the bottom 4 levels. Anything above that is existing. Did you take from that that you then knew that there was no fire strategy for the upper floors for this building?
Yeah, it appears that way.
Yes, it does appear that way. And is that how you understood it at the time?
Yeah, I took Simon's advice.
Right. So did it strike you as odd, given that you were overcladding an entire building and building a crown made of aluminium composite material?
No, Simon gave me quite a lengthy explanation.
Well, you can see the explanation he's given you in the email. Are you referring to another explanation?
In the email.
I see. Did you ever pass this response back to Siderise?
I don't remember.
No, we can't see any record of you doing so. So can we take it that you didn't?
Yes.
Do you remember whether Siderise, because you say you had a telephone discussion with them, but did Ricky Kay of Siderise or anybody else at Siderise ever raise any concern with you that there didn't appear to be a fire strategy for the upper floors?
I don't believe so.
Did you think to bring to the attention of John Hoban the fact that there was no fire strategy for the upper floors?
No, and I think that's because of Simon's last two sentences. He says that we would just revert to current regs. So, yeah, I believe the current, what he's saying in my mind is that the current regulations will be kept here rather than older ones.
Did you think to push Simon Lawrence and discuss with him whether you should be putting together a fire strategy document for this building if there wasn't one for the upper floors?
No, my view was Simon was experienced in this. He didn't seem to be too concerned. So, yeah.
Right. Now, Mr. Lawrence gave some evidence about this email, and his evidence was that he was mistaken in his response and that he was in fact referring to fire strategy drawings as opposed to a building fire strategy document. And I'll just give you the transcript reference for that. You don't need to see it, but it's really more for our purposes. Transcript day 23, page 103, lines 16 to 19. So that's on the record. We know that Exova had provided a draft outline fire safety strategy for the refurbishment in the November of 2013. Do you recall ever seeing such a document?
I wasn't aware of that document.
You weren't aware of that document?
No.
Well, let's just be absolutely clear. I can flash it up on the screen. It's EXO401107. Let's just have it up so that we can be crystal clear. This is the Grenfell Tower Outline Fire Safety Strategy, issue number 3 of the 7th of November 2013, Mr. Bailey. You've never seen this document?
I don't recall seeing it, no.
At the time of your involvement on the project, is that right?
Correct.
Okay. Now, going back to the email thread then, if we can, please, that we were looking at before, can we go then to HAR 406560 and look at the top email? I showed you this before. You passed it on. This is the Chris Mort Week link email, which you then passed on to Ray Bailey, Kevin Lamb and Mark Stapley, with the comment still going round in circles. I showed you it before, but I didn't ask any questions about it. What did you mean by still going around in circles?
From my understanding of these emails and the conversations we'd had via email on this issue, is that Siderise had told us the previous advice that conflicted with the building control officer's requirement or preference, and then they sent us a suggestion for the 120 minute sort of solution or proposal, and to me it felt like we weren't getting closer to a definitive answer.
Did the fact that Mr. Mort had said in terms in his email in the first paragraph, also on the second page of the attachment I've highlighted the weak link, so to speak, in terms of fire, did that not ring an alarm bell with you?
No.
Why is that?
I don't know. other than what I've...
It looks, from your response here and from what you told us earlier this morning in response to my questions, that you focused only on the proposal to alleviate the issues about the fire stopping stroke, the 90/30 and 120 point, but didn't actually take on board the second page of the attachment that we looked at and the weak link in terms of fire. Is that fair?
I think my answer is the same as before. I read it as the same issue.
Right. Did you expect Ray Bailey or Kevin Lamb or Mark Stapley to read the contents of Chris Mort's email and the attachment when you forwarded it to them?
I suppose that's a reasonable expectation.
Yes. Otherwise you wouldn't have forwarded it to them, I suppose. Yes?
Yes.
Yes. Can we then look at SIL 6078, please? And I'd like to look with you, please, at the second email on that string at the bottom of page 1. It's not that clear, but that's better. You can see that it starts from you, Ben Bailey, 30th of March, to Chris Mort, 1647. So it's on the same day as the discussion about the weak link. And if you scroll down to page 2, please. This is your response to his weak link email. You say, "Thanks, Chris. Ricky Sue, could you provide a price based on Chris's recommendation, please?" And that's the recommendation, I think, in the second paragraph, isn't it? That's the proposal, yes?
Yeah. Yes. I don't remember this particular reply, but
Right. So it looks as if from this you were interested in his proposal, which would alleviate the issues raised by the building control officer. Is that a fair reading of your response to him on that day?
yes.
Yes. And then if we turn to the SIL 6079, please, we can see that you get a response on the next day, 31st of March, from Sue Shepherd of Cider Rise, and she sends you a quotation. "Hi Ben, good morning. Following your conversation with Ricky and our technical officer Chris Mort, we have pleasure in attaching our amended quotation. Ben, please see, has recommended the revised fire barrier. We hope that our prices will again meet with your approval and look forward to receiving your further instructions." If you turn to page 2, we can see that there is an attachment and there's a quote. It's not terribly clear, 247227. And if we look at page 3, there's the quotation in full, I think. And there it is. And it's dated the 31st of March, 2015. It's sent to you. And we can see that there is a quotation for a horizontal open state cavity barrier fire rating E90 I60 and a fire stop of E120 I120, and the price is there. You see that?
Yes.
And then if we go to the next document, SIL 6081, please. This is an email from Chris Mort, Ricky Kay, on the 31st of March. "Ben, how did you get on, mate? Was everything clear with regards to Chris's markup and subsequent quote? Give me a bell if you need." Did you reply to that email? We can't find one.
I don't recall.
Is there a reason why you didn't reply to it?
Probably just from the dates that I know surrounding these email chains. I think either that day or the day afterwards, there was a clarification issued from the PCO.
Did you think to go back to Ricky Kay and say, I didn't agree with Chris's markup?
I don't recall. As I said, I don't recall this.
Okay, all right.
Actually.
I'm going to get back then to the discussions with building control. We looked at a lot of the chain before, and we saw earlier that you were the person whom Neil Crawford thought John Hoban should speak to at Harley's. We saw that on the 30th of March. Just after that, can we then go to the exchange with Simon Lawrence? RYD 3037553, please. This is an email under which Simon Lawrence sends to you, and only to you, a typical bay drawing, and he's forwarding to you the email from Neil Crawford to John Hoban and to him the same day earlier on, in fact 9 minutes earlier. And he says, Ben, just for your info only at the moment, Neil is discussing with BC, that's building control. He is aware of the urgency and cost implications. Studio E also have a vested interest in getting to the bottom of the issue, as they wrote the spec. Let them do their stuff and we'll come back to you later. You see that?
Yes.
Is it fair to say, in the light of what you had then, on the 31st of March, that is why you didn't respond to Mr. Kay's email asking you about the quote?
As I say, I don't remember at the time, but it's possible, yes.
In other words, you were aware that Ryden was still resisting John Hoban's position, and you thought there might be a solution, which is why you didn't go for Mr. Kay's quotation.
That's possible.
Now, can we then go to SEA 13076, please? This is the 1st of April. And this is a final email from John Hoban. It's the second email down to Neil Crawford, copied to Simon Lawrence. And he says he has no adverse comments to make on the cladding proposals. We'll go back to the body of that email in a minute. But Simon Lawrence then sends that on to you and to Ray Bailey. And he says, gents, this is the top of the page, the building control officer is now in agreement with the fire protection in the cladding being a cavity barrier rather than a fire stop as first thought. Now, you saw that on that day. As a result of that, did you consider it unnecessary to consider the matter any further?
I think I notified Siderise of this clarification.
How did you do that? By email or by telephone? Do you remember?
I may have forwarded the email.
Right. Had you had any hand in persuading John Hoban to agree with your position on the fire protection in the cladding being a cavity barrier rather than a fire stop?
Other than providing him with the information he requested, I don't think I had a...
Right. Did you have a conversation with him about the subject on the telephone?
I don't think so. As I said at the time, my view of what I knew about this at the time was that I wasn't able myself to be able to make a decision on something such as this, so I was deferring it to people who knew more than me. So I don't think I would have, influenced him.
I'm sorry, I'm going to have to ask you to keep your voice up.
Oh, sorry.
I couldn't hear that. So you were deferring to people who knew more than me, so I don't think I would have influenced him. Right. Given the solution that appears to have been arrived at least according to Simon Lawrence, Did that mean, or did that cause you not to take any steps to follow up and address the weak link for fire above the windows that Chris Mort had identified?
As I said before, I read that whole issue as a single issue. So when, i.e. not as a caveat, not as a when we got the definition of cavity barrier, yes, I felt that issue went away.
Do you agree that a close and careful consideration of what Chris Mort was saying, both in his email and in the drawings, would have led you to understand that there were two issues which Mr. Mort was addressing, and that he was giving advice about the position of cavity barriers and saying that there was a weak link at the head of the window, so far as regards fire?
My interpretation is the same as I've told you.
Right. Now, if we go on to HAR 30's 19412, we do see you going back to Ricky Kay the next day, 2nd of April 2015, and Chris Mort. You see that? And you say, and you forward on this message that you got from Simon Lawrence, as you said you did. Morning, Ricky. As discussed, please see drawing attached showing the placement of the fire break at the head of the window. The BCO has agreed to the definition of a cavity, so I believe the 3015 equivalent product can be used. ? You see that? You say, as discussed, please see drawing attached. But what discussion are you referring to there?
I don't recall.
Was there a telephone discussion between you and Ricky Kay, or you and Chris Mort, about the placement of the fire break at the head of the window?
That's what the email implies, but I don't remember conversation.
Right. Can we look at the drawing that you attached? It's at HAR 30's 19413. Now, this is a Studio E drawing, not a Harley drawing, isn't it?
Yes.
And we can see that on the right-hand side there is a proposed section, typical bay, heading, if you like, in the middle of the page, halfway down the right-hand side. And above that is a big orange box.
Yes.
And can you see that in hatched markings there, there is a cavity barrier marked, and it
Yes.
goes to the head of the window. Do you see?
Yes.
And also right under the sill. You see that? Yes?
I can't see the one under the sill.
I'm sorry, my misunderstanding of the hatching. There's one. It's the little thing immediately at the head of the window.
Yeah, I see the one by the arrow, yes.
Yes. Now, so far as cider eyes were concerned, is it fair to say that they were under the impression that you were going to install a cavity barrier at the head of the window in accordance with the drawing?
Based on them having one of our drawings, which is a later issue, I don't think so.
You don't think so? Given that you could see from this drawing that cavity barriers had been provided for in this drawing at the head of the window by Studio E, can you explain why you permitted cavity barriers to be installed above the head of the window if you had discussed their location and told cider eyes that they were going to be placed at the head, as you can see this drawing shows?
I don't know.
Do you accept that you ought to have known that the location of the cavity barriers at the head of the window was an important matter to you? Otherwise, you wouldn't have been discussing it with Cider Eyes.
So whilst I knew that cavity barriers were an important item in the build-up, I wasn't aware, as I am now, specifically about the suggestion that they should be at the head of the window. I don't remember any specific instruction or otherwise of why that wasn't done as in that architect's drawing.
Do you accept that by sending Cider Eyes this drawing, which shows the cavity barrier at the head of the window, therefore in a different location from where you had the cavity barrier on the weak link for fire drawing that we saw earlier, that you were giving Cider Eyes the impression that you had moved the cavity barrier so that it sat immediately above the head of the window, and had therefore taken their advice on that subject?
I think if that was the case, we would have sent them a Harley drawing showing that.
But why did you send them this drawing then?
I don't know. I don't recall.
You don't know why you sent them this drawing?
Other than so I don't remember sending it. So other than the context of the email you showed me, so I don't remember that conversation.
Because you say in the covering email, please see drawing attached showing the placement of the fire break at the head of the window. And I've got to repeat the suggestion that you were telling Cider Eyes, in essence, that you had taken their advice, had moved the cavity barrier in response to the weak link for fire warning. No?
I don't believe so. I think if that had been discussed, we would have reissued a Harley drawing, not an architect's drawing.
Mr. Mort's statement makes it crystal clear, and we can go to it if you like, that he was raising a separate concern about a weak link for fire, separate from the question of the time periods for fire stopping or cavity barriers. That's what he was doing. But I think you're telling us that you read it as a single issue.
Yes.
Do you accept that you were wrong about that?
I think knowing what I know now, unfortunately, yes.
Now, can we look at paragraph 31 of your witness statement, please, on page 10? You say there, I was not involved in any compliance issues or decisions in relation to the project. Until the fire, I had no reason to question either the design or the materials being used. Now, Mr. Bailey, having considered the material, the emails that we've been discussing, particularly at the end of March regarding fire barriers, do you now accept that you were indeed involved in the discussion of location and specification of cavity barriers?
Insofar as asking the questions that I thought were pertinent and helpful in trying to get to the bottom of the issue.
Indeed, and therefore paragraph 31 has to be rewritten, doesn't it? It's not correct.
I think in paragraph 37 I do make reference to this issue in terms of advice sought.
Yes, but at paragraph 31, where you say, I was not involved in any compliance issues or decisions in relation to the project. So far as cavity barriers is concerned, that's not correct, is it?
I'm unsure.
Well, it's not a difficult question. Given what we've seen in detail this morning, Mr. Bailey, about your involvement in the cavity barrier question, when you say I was not involved in any compliance issues or decisions in relation to the project, that's not correct, is it?
Well, as I said in paragraph 37, I've detailed that involvement, so
Yes. I know you say that at paragraph 37. I'm asking you, and I'll ask you one more time. Given what we've seen about your involvement in the cavity barrier question at the end of March 2015, it is not correct to say that you were not involved in any compliance issues or decisions in relation to the project, is it?
yeah, as I said, insofar as I've asked the questions, that was my involvement. So asking the questions about the cavity barriers, yes, would be a compliance issue.
That's
I
right.
had an involvement in it.
And therefore, paragraph 31 is incorrect in that respect.
I think put like that in that particular scenario. As I said, I had an involvement in that area.
Yes. Will you please accept, therefore, that paragraph 31 of your witness statement, in that respect, is incorrect?
For this particular issue, yes.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, we're going to turn to a slightly different topic, but one I will not finish before 1 o'clock.
It would probably be better to stop there, wouldn't it, Mr.
Yes.
Millett?
It would.
Yes. Well, Mr. Bailey, we're going to break now to have some lunch. We'll come back at 2 o'clock, please. And again, please don't talk to anyone about your evidence or anything to do with it while you're out of the room. All right?
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. 2 o'clock, please.